second part of our, I'm gonna have to just make a video for the other part for B. So for our second part of 3A.3A, this is just a way that for me, it helped me work through the unit circle and memorize things. Just remembering that 30, 60, 90 comes from a special right triangle. And how I remembered it is I always labeled it as 30, 60, 90. I went clockwise, and then I always numbered it as 1, 2, square root of 3, 1, 2, square root of 3. So that means that even without a unit circle or knowing something, if I know that the reference angle is 30 or 60, as long as I know this triangle, I can establish what the sine and cosine are. Does that make sense? So like I know the sine of 60 is going to be square root of 3 over 2. I know that the cosine of 60 is going to be 1 over 2. So like this helped me whenever all else fails. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So this is the triangle that was my friend that I lived by for 30, 60, 90s. And I wrote it on every single test that I took. So the first thing I ever wrote was this triangle and this triangle. And again, I go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, square root of 3, 1, 2, square root of 3. And that's my 30, 60, 90. Okay. On the 45, 45, that's 1, 1, square root of 2, 1, 1, square root of 2. And that's just, again, at any point, if I forget, I know the sine of 45 is 1 over the square root of 2. And I just have to make sure I ratify it. But this is going to be like my little tip or shortcut for the unit circle is if you don't want to memorize this, memorize that. It's just going to take you a little longer to fill in. But as far as being able to know the values, that's what's going to happen. Okay. That's because on your unit circle, all the angles outside of quadrant 1 have a reference angle of either 30, 60, or 45. So if I always know those, and I remember all students take calculus, I can identify the signs and where they go. Okay. So just wanted to point that out. So for example, here, without having to look at your unit circle, but thinking about the triangles only, if that helps you, just a really quick practice. I was going to have you practice using the triangles, not the unit circle. So to answer, what is the sine of pi over 6? What's the cosine of pi over 6? What's the tan of pi over 6? So keeping in mind, only using your unit circles. Not your unit circle, only using the triangles to practice memorizing the triangle. Fill these in. Hopefully you deem this helpful and not like a waste of our time. Got it. All right, are we ready? So again, keeping the triangles in mind, when I draw my triangle, this is literally what I do at the top of every single paper. All right, 1, 2, square root of 3, and then I label everything in. I draw my triangle, 1, 1, square root of 2, and I label everything inside. So when I'm thinking about what is the sine of 30, well, the sine of 30 is opposite over hypotenuse. That's going to give me 1 over 2. What's the cosine of 30? Cosine of 30 is adjacent over hypotenuse. So that gives me square root of 3 over 2. What's the tan of 30? 30, that's opposite over adjacent, which is going to give me 1 square root of 3, which is square root of 3 over 3. So then repeating 45s are my favorite. And then they're going to be the opposite for cosine and for sine. The cosine of 30 is the sine of 60. I can talk at some point. And then you get the reciprocal here of square root of 3. Okay. What do you notice about complementary angles? So our complementary angles are 30 and 60. So they're flipped. They're opposites, right? So we know that the sine of 30 is going to equal the cosine of sine of 30 equals the cosine of 60. We know that the sine of 45 is going to equal the cosine of 45. Later on, you're going to learn that these are called co-functional identities. Oh, functional identities. It's what we're supposed to be working on Monday. Huh? Monday. Remember, I told you I was just